Hi, I'm Todd Surovell. I'm an archaeologist and a professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Wyoming. And today I'm going to talk to you about some archaeological research that we've been doing in the state of Wyoming. Specifically, I'm going to talk about the first people who migrated to the state around 13,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age. To set the stage, I want to give you a little bit of context for human prehistory. And here we are looking at the Americas around, let's say, 20,000 years ago. At this time, there were two large ice sheets covering the northern part of North America, ice sheets as thick as a mile. One ice sheet centered over the Hudson Bay in Canada and another on the Canadian Rocky Mountains. Because of all this water that was tied up in glacial ice, sea levels were about 100 meters or 300 feet lower than they are today. And when the sea levels dropped, they exposed the large bridge of land connecting Northeast Asia to North America. We call this land bridge Beringia. And sometime at the end of the last ice age, probably around 15,000 years ago, we know that people walked across from far northeastern Asia into the western part of Alaska and the Yukon territories. At that time, the way was blocked, the way south was blocked. These ice sheets formed essentially an unimpenetrable barrier. And humans hung out in that part of the world probably for about 1,000 years before glacial ice retreated to the extent that people were able to migrate to the south. And sometime after, probably 14,000 years ago, humans were able to migrate through those glaciers, either through an inland route or along the Pacific coast. We don't exactly know. In fact, they could have taken both routes. South of those ice sheets, humans found an environment unlike the environment of North America that we know today. I mean, obviously this was a glacial time, but North America was not only different in terms of temperature, but also in terms of the animals that lived here. When humans arrived in North America was home to a huge array of large mammal species, most of which are now extinct. Things like you see here, mammoths and mastodons, extinct forms of elephants, giant armadillos, giant ground sloths, native horses, camels, and a huge array of carnivores like saber-toothed cats, lions, and American cheetahs. And this was the environment that humans entered. The first evidence for humans, at least the first non-controversial evidence that we see for humans south of the ice sheets, appears around 13,000 years ago. These people we call, the people who made these archaeological sites and these cultural remains, we call the Paleo Indians. And first sites in North and South America appear very quickly and across two continents within a very short period of time. In fact, it seems like people were able to colonize the entirety of the Americas within centuries, if not a millennium. Within about 500 years, we see sites across two continents. The first recognizable and widespread evidence for humans in North America is associated with the kind of spear point that you see here. They're very distinctive and found across the continent. These are called Clovis points. The examples I'm showing you here are from a site in northern Mexico called Fin del Mundo. These artifacts are commonly found with the remains of extinct megafauna meaning very large animals. And in this case, what you're seeing here are the remains of a Columbian mammoth or an Ice Age elephant at the Murray Springs site in southeastern Arizona that was found associated with Clovis artifacts. What evidence suggests is that humans arrived in North America and colonized the continents very, very quickly with a population explosion fueled by the hunting of these large animals. And this kind of evidence is found across the continent. So, for example, in the 1970s in the state of Wyoming, in the north central part of the state in the Bighorn Basin, a University of Wyoming archaeologist named George Frizen excavated this site. This is called the Colby site. And you can see a pile of mammoth bones here that were associated with 4 spear points and about 30 other artifacts. And today we're excavating a site that's similar but different. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. This site is called the Laprelle Mammoth Site. This site is in central eastern Wyoming, and it has allowed us to gain insights not only into the process of human global colonization and the first peoples of the Americas, but also the first people in Wyoming. The site was initially discovered in 1986. Like a lot of very important archaeological sites, it was not discovered by professional archaeologists. It was discovered by 2 locals who lived in Douglas, Wyoming, who found huge bones protruding from the bank of the stream that you see here. This is called Laprelle Creek. In 1987, they notified George Frizzen of the discovery, and he went out and tested the site with a small crew. You can see the excavation here in 1987. It was a very small excavation area. They found the remains of a young Columbian mammoth associated with 14 artifacts. Now, a Columbian mammoth, again, is an extinct form of elephant. These are not small animals, up to 20,000 pounds. This animal weighed, or 9,000 kilograms. George was pretty excited about these finds at the time. Here you can see the bone bed, or the remains of the elephant, laid out in the ground. It's mostly in anatomical order here. You can still see the ribs are still in anatomical position. And in and among these bones of this mammoth, he found one flake tool, a butchery tool for butchering this animal, and then 7 small flakes or chips from sharpening tools. At the time, in 1987, Dr. Frizzen was pretty convinced that he had found another mammoth kill site. Evidence of the first people in Wyoming hunting these large extinct animals. But in Wyoming, we can't work on private land without the permission of the landowner, and a dispute with the local landowner halted the investigation at the site for 27 years. When I was hired at the University of Wyoming 19 years ago, I couldn't wait to get back into the site, but it simply wasn't available to us until 2014. In 2014, we returned to the site, and we've been working there ever since, and it's produced some pretty incredible things. Here you see a video. We're flying over an old railroad bridge from the Chicago Northwestern Railway and down Laprelle Creek, and coming onto our excavations here. And that big tent shows our excavations from last summer in 2021. And on the bottom left-hand side of the video, you can see the screening area where we take sediments from the excavation and screen them using water from the creek to find anything that we missed in the excavation itself. When we went back to the site in 2014, we did the obvious thing, what anybody would do. We'd found George's old excavation block. We exposed that, and then we dug a set of excavation units ringing that excavation block. And this, you can see undergraduate students from the University of Wyoming getting their first archaeological experience excavating at this site. That first season was a bit of a disappointment, and here we are screening. You can see our screening operations here. The sediments from the excavation are going into these screens, and then we're putting water through those to pass them through the screen, and we can find very small artifacts this way. And as I said, our initial excavations were pretty disappointing. So on this map, you can see Dr. Frizzen's original excavations and then our excavations surrounding it. And we actually found very, very little. I had dreams of finding mammoth skulls and mammoth tusks and huge bones, but in fact, we found very little in the way of identifiable mammoth bone. We did get radiocarbon dates. We know the age of this site. It dates to about 12,950 years BP, or before present. It's about 13,000 years old. We found 2 large pieces of mammoth bone, the biggest of which is about this big. It was a rib fragment, and then part of a foot or a toe. We found several hundred small little bits of weathered mammoth bone. That mammoth sat on the surface probably for 5 to 10 years before it was buried. It weathered in the sun, and it broke into hundreds of pieces. We find these little bits of mammoth bone. We found 3 small pieces of red ochre, which is a natural pigment, an iron oxide mineral called hematite, and only 5 artifacts, 5 flakes. Here's the mammoth bone we found. You can see the rib crossing the screen here, and it's broken. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see the ankle or toe bone. Here are the flakes we found. They're not very exciting, and in fact, you can see how tiny they are if you recognize that scale. I'm going to put something a little more familiar for scale here. I'm going to put a dime over that. You can see these artifacts are absolutely tiny. If you don't know the size of an American dime, it's about the size of your thumbnail. All of these artifacts are smaller than your thumbnail. If that was all we had found, we probably would not have gone back to the site, but we had an incredible stroke of luck. In this slide here, you can see our excavations on the right side of the screen where the person in the red shirt is, holding their hands up. That's where the students are excavating. We had to carry these heavy buckets of dirt along the face of this terrace down to the screening area, which is a little bit dangerous. So we cut a pathway into the terrace face to make it a little safer for our students working. And as we were cutting back into that terrace, we hit another artifact completely by accident. And that artifact looked like this. This may not look like an artifact to you. It looks like a big stream cobble buried in sediments, but there's a couple of things unusual about it. One, these sediments that you see here are very, very fine grained. These are deposits that were laid down by Laprelle Creek in a flood. They're dominated by very, very fine grained sediments, silts, and sands. There should not be a large rock in them. And when you see a large rock like this in very fine grained sediments, it suggests something else was responsible for its deposition there. And there's something else in this case, is humans. It's in exactly the same stratigraphic position as the mammoth, meaning we have this big layer cake of sediments, right? And we only have one human occupation in a particular layer, and that this artifact is falling right in that layer. And it's sitting 12 meters south of that mammoth, so it's pretty far away. You can also see, looking at the edge here, that the edge is a little bit scalloped. It's been flaked. It has been modified by humans. When we took it out, this is what it looked like. And what this is a big cobble of a type of stone we call quartzite, and there are 3 flakes removed from one edge to make it very sharp. This is what we call a chopper. This is a large tool from the Stone Age used for butchering a very large animal, for taking it apart, and it's still sharp. We had that tool tested for protein blood residue, where we pull proteins out of microfissures in the tool itself, and it tested positive for elephant, suggesting this thing was in contact with a mammoth. We went back and tested the tool that George Frizzen found in 1987 using the same methods. It also tested positive for elephant. So we had pretty clear indication that we did have human interaction with this animal. The discovery of this tool, though, made the site much, much larger. It went from a fairly small, tight excavation around this mammoth to now potentially a much, much larger site. The known size of the site more than doubled with this very serendipitous find. Over the next 2 seasons, we returned to that area where we found the chopper to see if there was more there. Was this just an isolated artifact somebody tossed away, or was there more there? And in fact, what we found was quite incredible and unexpected. We opened up a large excavation area, and we found really interesting things. A big area where the sediments were stained with hematite or pigment. A hearth feature, meaning a fire pit where people were cooking. In fact, it was full of burned bone. Hundreds and hundreds of small flakes from making and resharpening stone tools. A large number of additional stone tools. We found bison bone. They're not only killing and eating mammoth at the site, but bison as well. We found bone needles. These are implements for sewing. These are some of the oldest bone needles from the Western Hemisphere. We did not expect to find bone needles at a mammoth kill site. And then a bone bead, an ornament probably from clothing from Ice Age humans. So I'll show you some of those now. Here's the stain of red ochre. This is what it looked like in real life. And you can see in the center of the slide, these nails are 1 meter apart. And this stained area, stained pink, is stained because there's all this fine particulate hematite, this natural iron pigment that has been brought into the site. We can digitally enhance this photo to make this stain show up much better. And when you do, you see this is a very, very large area that has been absolutely stained red with this pigment. Sadly, we don't know why. We don't know what they're using this ochre for. There are 2 general kinds of ideas, that it's some kind of ritual behavior, or perhaps something utilitarian, like it was used in hide working. Simple answer is I don't know. We were able to geochemically source this ochre, compare the chemistry of this ochre to natural sources of ochre around the state, and we know that it was carried here from 85 kilometers to the southeast, and a lot of it was carried. It tells you whatever they were using it for, it was very important stuff. Here are some of the tools we found in this area. These are butchery tools and hide working tools and knives. Some pieces of bison bone. It shows you, they're sitting on this huge pile of mammoth meat, and yet they continue to hunt other animals. Here you're seeing ribs of bison. Here are bone needles. These are, again, very, very tiny. They're only about 1 to 2 millimeters in diameter. We have about 12 needle fragments from the site, and probably at least 3 or 4 needles present in total, showing that they were sewing, making or repairing clothing in all likelihood. And here's the bone bead. This is a very, very tiny tubular piece of bone. We don't know what kind of animal it's made of. You can see it has incisions on it. To my knowledge, this is the oldest bead from North and South America, from the Western Hemisphere. Incredible things to find at a mammoth kill site. As our excavations expanded, and now you can see what our excavations look like today, it's much, much bigger excavation. And we've found not only just this dead mammoth with artifacts around it, but also additional hearth-centered activity areas. What this means is we have a fire pit in the center, and then the fire pit is surrounded by artifacts and bone. And it very much looks like these are domestic spaces. We also have found a Clovis point, an absolutely beautiful artifact. I've been looking for one of these for 25 years and finally found one. And it was found quite a ways from the mammoth, in fact, pretty far south. The hearth-centered activity areas, you can see the stain of ochre there on the right and two other ones, one to the west of the mammoth and one to the far southwest. Large numbers of artifacts, bone. These are very clearly domestic spaces. And what we can do is study the variation and the technology, the stone tool technology, the animal bones. And by doing this, we can maybe start to investigate aspects of the social organization of the first people in Wyoming. Imagine if you had the opportunity to look in the houses of 3 families who are living in Ice Age Wyoming and the kinds of things that you could learn by studying what's in those houses. And that's what we can do at this site. Here's one simple example. By comparing types of stone we find in 2 of these different hearth-centered activity areas, we know they're coming from completely opposite sides of the state, which tells us that people are coming to this site and aggregating at this site, cooperating in the butchery, perhaps killing and consumption of this mammoth. It also shows you the size of the social networks that existed in the Ice Age in Wyoming that spanned hundreds of kilometers. And we can do this again because we know the natural sources of the types of stone that people were using to make these tools. And we can determine, using that knowledge, where they came from before they were at the site. What's interesting about this particular pathway, that people came from the west and from the east, following the Sweetwater River from the west and following the Platte River from the southeast, is that this pathway is a very, very famous pathway through the state of Wyoming and, in fact, across the continent of North America. From 1846 to 1869, Euro-American settlers took exactly the same pathway along a migrant trail we call the Oregon Trail, because it follows a low-cost pathway through the continent, essentially a gap in the Rocky Mountains, which form a barrier to east-west migration across the continent. And it's really cool to see that people in the Ice Age were following exactly the same pathways. To put all of this together and to wrap it up, where we started was we have this mammoth kill site. In fact, if we look at just this part of the site, this is a classic mammoth kill site. It's exactly the kinds of things we find in mammoth kill sites. If we only had this part of the site, we'd say this is a campsite. This is a domestic space. We have sewing, and hide work, and the use of ornaments and cooking. We'd say this is a campsite. And in fact, what we have here is both. We know, as anthropologists, from studying recent foraging peoples in West Africa, who don't hunt elephants anymore, but they did up through the 1980s, that when you kill an animal of this size, usually if you kill an animal, say an elk or a bison as a hunter, you cut it up and you bring the choice pieces back home. But with an elephant, it's just too big of a task. It's actually easier to pick up your camp and move it to the animal than it is to pick up the animal and move it to your camp. So these Mbuti foragers in the Democratic Republic of Congo that you see here, when they kill an elephant, they pick up their camp and they move to the camp. They butcher the elephant, they smoke the meat, they dry it, and they'll be there for a week or two, and then they move on. And we think that's exactly what we have going on here. So to conclude, at the Laprelle Mammoth site, we have a kill site and an associated campsite from about 13,000 years ago, where multiple groups of people aggregated from across the state to possibly kill, but definitely to butcher and consume the animal. What this site really provides moving forward is a really unique opportunity because we have these different domestic spaces that are contemporaneous to look at social aspects of human life in Ice Age Wyoming. And in the future, we hope to answer questions about cooperation in hunting and butchery, sharing of food, group composition, and the spatial organization of campsites. And in these ways, archaeological research at the University of Wyoming is contributing to our understanding of human global colonization in the prehistory of Americas. Thanks for listening, and if you have any questions or would like to contact me, you can find me in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Wyoming, and my email address and contact information is there.